So how long have you been doing parent consulting at this point?
With the coaching or the actual therapeutic consulting?
What's the difference between the two? So the
So,
therapeutic is the things that you're doing recently with the Utah company.
okay. Yeah, so the therapeutic consulting is placing, when there's significant safety issues, placing,
Okay.
helping place kids in residential.
Okay, and
And
that's new.
That's kind of new. And then the coaching has been almost 2 years, I'd say a year and a half.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And what's the emphasis of the parent coaching?
So now it's shifting. So are we actually starting right now?
Yes.
Oh,
That's what this was.
So we're actually starting the webinar. Okay, let's go.
Good morning. This one's just going to have blippy starts no matter what we do.
Exactly.
So welcome back. I hope that you all who joined us last week, I believe on Monday, and we had some really funky kind of, scoot over a little bit more, audio issues to figure out with technology. We want to say to Val Delier, thank you very much for being our expert in figuring this out and getting us up and running again this morning. So we appreciate your patience and your return and coming back to join us again this week. So Vashti's wearing her lucky shirt.
My lucky blue shirt, yes.
And we're doing a redo. So the topic today is screen time health. And Vashti is really focusing on that the idea of awareness, connection, and avoiding battles with your kids when it comes to the infamous phone, computers, social media, gaming, all of that. We know what a huge issue it is in households. My kids are older, and I still remember they were right on the wave of all this becoming new for them, and it was tough. And there weren't really people out there at that point in time, kind of helping to navigate kind of the wilderness of social media and screens. And I just remember my oldest child like always carrying the phone with him. He would take a nap and it would be like on his chest because like somebody might call him or text him when he was napping. So the idea that there's like someone that's got some expertise in having worked with enough other parents, really read this research, kind of looked at what's working, what's not working. I appreciate your being out there and kind of helping us work our way through this. So a couple of housekeeping things first. There is a question and answer box. If you have a question for Vashti, you can type that in and we will try to get it to her. If not, we will definitely try to get an answer to you after the webinar. There's also a chat box, and that's a whole separate thing. So if you want to share information with other folks that are watching or have questions that kind of are being thrown out to the community, you can kind of have those side chats going on at the same time. Towards the end of the webinar, we're going to, Vashti's going to say it's time for the poll. The poll, the responses to the polls are specific to parents because that's part of our funding source. So we really do want your feedback on just in terms of, was this valuable? What other things are you interested in? And I think we've got like 5 poll questions. It's not hard. So please respond to those. And for those who, if you want to share this, it's archived. If you go to the Federation webpage, Idaho Federation of Families, you will find under parent education, it's there. You can also look on the Idaho Federation of Families YouTube site and you'll see a library of all of our archived webinars. So I encourage you to share that with friends and family, or if there's things you missed and just want to kind of go back and review. So with that, thank you for making yourself available 2 weeks in a row, and
of course.
Looking forward to your information.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much for having me, and thanks for coming back to try this again. So like Carol said, my name is Vashti Somerville, and I am a mom of 2 teenage girls. So I have some lived experience parenting a child with depression and anxiety and severe self-harm. I'm a certified teacher in the state of Idaho, and I'm the co-chair of the St. Luke's Pediatric Family Advisory Council, where I represent families who have children hospitalized due to mental health conditions. And I'm also on the Idaho Suicide Prevention Coalition. So professionally now, I've sort of shifted, and I'm doing therapeutic consulting. What that means is if there's significant safety or behavioral issues in the home and a child needs residential treatment, I help make that decision a little easier for our family. And then doing coaching and workshops like this, which are really my favorite because it's upstream work, it's prevention and wellness. And truly, I'm just trying to be the person that I needed when our family was really struggling. So this first slide I love. it's one of my favorite quotes: be the person you needed when you were young. And I think about that a lot through my day-to-day interactions with my kids, and it helps put me in a spot of curiosity and empathy as I'm navigating things that really could be potential struggles like screen issues. So be the person you needed when you were young. So the title of this webinar is Screen Time Health: Create Awareness, Build Connection, and Avoid Battle. And I think that things sort of need to happen in that order. I am far from perfect. I stumble in my own home still with this. This is a really tricky issue. And I think there is a correlation between screen time use and the depression and anxiety increase that we're seeing with our youth. And I wish I had an easy button and that you could leave this and have every answer, but I'm sorry, that won't happen. But I will try to offer you some new perspectives. So some of the resources that I really, really recommend, iGen by Jean 20, I think is how you say her last name. That's got a lot of great research about the correlation between screen use and mental health conditions. Reset Your Child's Brain by a psychiatrist named Victoria Dunkley. Great resource to look at what she calls electronic screen syndrome and some of the conditions that she sees manifesting as a result of screen use. And then one of my most favorite books right now is The Yes Brain by Dr. Dan Siegel. And that's just a great look at brain development and emotional regulation and how to connect with your kid, looking at it from where they are developmentally. The next slide has books by Dr. Shefali, who she's the conscious parenting guru, which that's really all about how to cultivate deeper connection and sort of look at the things we need to look at as parents and question the default parenting techniques that came through us, maybe that aren't serving the needs that we have today, and just helping us really look at those and then connect with our kids. And then the next slide is just some more Dan Siegel books on brain development. The Whole Brain Child, Brainstorm, The Power and Purpose of the Teenage Brain. These are all really, really great resources to have. So the concepts that we'll cover today, they include receptive brains versus reactive brains. So that's a really important thing when you're trying to have a big conversation with your child about something that is maybe a trigger for them, like their screen habits, making sure they're in a receptive place, not a reactive place. We're going to talk about connection and relationship, which is the foundation for any of this. An activity that I love called The Person I Mean to Be. We're going to talk about who's in control. Is the phone in control of you, or are you in control of the phone? Creativity versus consumption. We'll go a little bit into the physical, psychological, and social effects of screens. We'll look at digital footprints and then have kind of an honest conversation about adult modeling. We're going to talk about joining them in their world, a thing called the Healthy Mind Platter, creating some main house rules, and then this beautiful letter written by a blogger called Tether Yourself to Real Life. So I think that we have to start looking beyond reward and punishment with these screens. We have to stop using them as a carrot and a stick, because if we're really honest, like Carol and I were discussing before I started, this is an issue that came on really quickly. This technology happened really fast, and suddenly, the majority of us have these personal devices we can carry everywhere, and that's adults included. So it's kind of a social experiment for all of us. So we really need to look beyond reward and punishment and reframe technology boundaries as working together as adults and children to create conditions that are best for our brains and our bodies to thrive, not as punishment. Okay, so we're creating the best conditions for optimum wellness, and we're not just looking to control them and punish them with these phones. So our approach with our kids will determine whether they are receptive or reactive. So it's not just what we say, but it's how we say it and when we say it. So we're going to really look at strategies for navigating away from negative behavioral and emotional states, so sort of aggressive behavior or withdrawal, and really look at how we expand our child's capacity for positivity. So rather than allowing the screens to be negative, we're going to allow the relationship to be positive. So let's dive right into receptive versus reactive brains. So another way of talking about that is being in your upstairs brain or your downstairs brain. And Dr. Dan Siegel, whose books I referenced in the beginning, he talks a lot about this. So if you think of your upstairs brain as sort of that prefrontal cortex where you're able to reason, it's kind of your thinking brain, versus your downstairs brain is sort of that low brain, that fight or flight, part of the brain responsible for involuntary things like breathing or your heart beating, but also this fight or flight that, and we've all seen our kids get into that sort of a state. So the yes brain has such a great way of describing this. So you'll see three boxes here. So you have the green box is our window of tolerance. And this is really where we can be calm, we have perspective, we can be flexible, we can think ahead. So we all want to be in our window of tolerance. It's not possible to always be in your window of tolerance. The goal is to make sure when communication is happening that both parties are in their window of tolerance, adults and kids. And then our goal is to help our kids come back into that, or ourselves, into that green zone when we become dysregulated, and then eventually help widen the window of tolerance for our kids. So we'll look at the other two. The red zone is hyperreactive. So if we can go back to that slide, that when we're hyperreactive, it's a temper tantrum. We're yelling. I can get in my red zone as an adult, and I think we've all been there with our kids, whether they're toddlers or teenagers. So their nervous system is dysregulated. There's a lot of, just externalizing, aggressive externalizing. The opposite of that would be detachment. You're still dysregulated. Your nervous system is still dysregulated. But if you think of like the teenager pulling a hoodie over their head and maybe having headphones in, and they're just really withdrawing and silent, they're still dysregulated. So I'm going to tell you that no learning or connection or big conversations can ever happen in that red or blue zone. So the first question when anything comes up, whether it's screen time or anything else you're dealing with, are we all in our upstairs brain? Am I as the parent in my upstairs brain? Is my child in their upstairs brain or that window of tolerance? If not, take a pause and wait until everybody kind of recovers, and then you can start to address things. There's an article I read where a therapist uses a glitter jar in her office. So she explains to teenagers, she shakes it up and the glitter's going everywhere through the water. And she says, this is what happens when you're out of your window of tolerance, or when you're in your low brain and your brain is dysregulated. So she kind of uses that as a visual and says, we all need to settle our glitter before we can have this conversation. So I think that's a really helpful analogy. So hopefully maybe some of you can even make glitter jars in your house and use those. So that's the reactive versus receptive brain bit. Let's dive into what I think is the most important part. So connection and relationship. So rather than allowing the screen to be negative, we're going to really focus on allowing the relationship to be positive. And probably one of my biggest takeaways from all the reading that I've done of the conscious parenting work, and really probably the information that helped me the most as my child was recovering from some pretty severe depression, was to focus on connection over control. So I started a strategy where, and I don't do it perfectly, but I just try to do a little better every day, where I get out of my role as parent sometimes, in that sometimes we think of our role as parent, we need to constantly teach or correct. And so I think from a child's perspective, sometimes that's all they hear. So I would try to take a pause with every communication and say, is this communication meant to control or correct in some way, or am I trying to deepen connection? And I think when you have a kid that's struggling, especially with some self-harm or major depression or anxiety, that restoring connection and helping them feel connected anytime we can is preventative. It's a protective factor. And I think we're all craving connection, and that is the root of some of the obsessive screen use that we see with kids. I mean, truly, they're looking for connection, but it's it's not the same as face-to-face connection. So what I'm saying here is don't allow power struggles over screens to damage connection ever. And just kind of realize when your child is out of that window of tolerance or coming up against their edges of their limitations and skills, et cetera, and then hold a boundary around the screen. But once again, we're going to frame that in a way that says we're doing this to promote wellness and to create conditions that are the best for our brains and bodies. I'm not trying to control you. I'm not trying to punish you. And ultimately, we want to teach them to self-regulate because they go to college, they still have this technology and they have to be able to regulate it on their own. So connection, the next slide is probably one of my favorite visuals. And this information, once again, comes from the conscious parenting work. So if you look at this hand, and this hand represents the hand of life, the pinky is going to represent external accomplishments. So all the things that we measure, grades, sporting achievements, music achievements, all those things that we kind of measure and give rewards for. The next four fingers represent connection, connection to yourself, to your family, to your community, and to a sense of purpose. And when we really think about this, as a culture, we put a lot of emphasis in that pinky, in that external accomplishment. And I believe that the epidemic of depression and anxiety and self-harm and the things that we're seeing really boils down to a lack of connection. And I think that is connection to self, to our family, to our community, and a sense of purpose. And I'll go into this a little more later, that connection to self. I think the phones rob many of us have an opportunity to really connect with our inner world, adults and kids alike. So we're going to go into that a little more deeply as we move through this. But I love this visual, and hopefully it can remind you to take some of the focus off that pinky and really try to design experiences for yourself and for your child for deepening that connection in those other four areas. So the next slide comes from information from the Arbinger Institute, and there's a great book called Anatomy of Peace, and it's such a wonderful way of looking at communicating with anybody. But I like this as a reminder to sort of, I think, turn things on their head from how we normally look at them with our kids. So if you look at the top of the pyramid, we've got correcting. And once again, as parents, we think our role as parents is to constantly teach and correct. And that's really dealing with things as they're going wrong. If you go lower down the pyramid, those steps are helping things go right. So the rules for working the pyramid are you work the bottom up. And when you get stuck, go lower on the pyramid. And that really our mindset is what matters most. And I would say also being in that upstairs brain, making sure we're not in a hyperreactive or withdrawn state. Once again, adults and kids alike. This applies to the adults. So if you look at the bottom of the pyramid, you're really going to focus on, making sure your heart's at peace, that you are examining the scripts that you're using with your kid. It's not just default. You're really you're not just making rules and saying no's or whatever it is, because that's sort of what came through you from generations past. So you're really looking at the why. Why are you doing things? You're intentionally really examining your beliefs, and then also staying in that upstairs brain. That would be the bottom. Then you're going to really work on building relationship, and then listening and learning. And then you go into teaching and communicating. And then the correcting is at the very top. And hopefully if we've helped things go right, we don't have to be in the correcting spot as often. So this is another really, really great visual, and I would highly recommend anything by the Arbinger Institute and the book Anatomy of Peace. So in the next slide, I wrote, humanize yourself and be honest. Learning to live with technology is a side-by-side journey with adults. And we have to acknowledge our own limitations and that this is uncharted territory for all of us. We're walking with them on this side-by-side journey. We do not have the answers. So this mindset, we're not going to just be seen as the rule maker and the enforcer. We're going to get them talking. We're going to try to understand what's important to them and what their needs are, and then be in this calm space where we can have discussions to help find out what is healthiest for all of us. So we want to foster a spirit of collaboration around the screens, and we want to be honest that we have our own struggles and that we aren't great at setting our own boundaries as adults for most of us. So remember that when they're on that phone, what they're doing is really important to them for the most part, and they are trying to network with their friends and establish connection. And it does become an unhealthy tether, and we all know this, but we're going to talk about that. But just acknowledging from a space of curiosity and empathy that from their perspective, it's really important what they're doing. So we're going to neutralize technology. We're not going to label it as bad. We're not going to focus on it in that way because that gives it more power than it deserves. And it's all in how we use it. Not all screen time is created equal. So we're going to talk about that. So we're going to keep our kids' integrity intact by staying out of judgment. Once again, be in the space of curiosity and empathy as we navigate this. So we have to remember that for all of us, the ability to navigate screens in a healthy way is a skill that needs to be learned and practiced, just like driving. And once again, this is a big social experiment. Handheld devices at our disposal 24/7. This is new. This didn't exist when I was a kid. So we're going to really cultivate awareness about this. So in my mind, knowledge and empowerment and choice will equal self-direction, right? So we're going to focus on this relationship, really be mindful of brain development, not upstairs, downstairs brain, focus on that connection, and then really cultivate awareness about what are the best practices to keep us all healthy. And I think at that point, we can really get buy-in and kids will be able to start self-regulating, especially as we model our own self-regulation around these. So I'm going to go into an activity that I love. There's a quote, "The way you tell your story to yourself matters." So self-talk matters. And I do think we play a very big role in shaping our kids' self-talk. I think that it's really important how our kids believe we perceive them. And sometimes it's easy to perceive teenagers in a negative light because they're challenging. It's a really difficult time. But once again, go to curiosity, go to empathy first. So this activity is the person I mean to be. And I think this really helps shape self-talk. So one of the things I like to say, and I got this from another parent coach friend of mine, is which way do you turn? Do you turn towards your phone or do you turn towards human connection? Once again, that question is for adults and for kids. Are you able to give your phone a rest and let your brain direct you? So for example, in the mornings, do you let your brain formulate a plan and dictate your day and not go to your phone for information first thing in the morning? Another question is, who gets the gift of your presence? Is it the person you're with or your phone? So the person I mean to be activity, I've done this in a lot of ways, and you could get really creative in your home. I've traced like a chalk drawing of a body on a big piece of picture paper and taped it on a wall and had sticky notes and had everyone just sort of write qualities that they feel are important to them, their character traits. So some examples that have come out of those activities. I am the kind of person who looks people in the eye, who values the human I am with, who makes deposits in emotional bank accounts. And if you haven't heard that term, that's making as many positive deposits in relationships as you can so that those bank accounts can weather the inevitable withdrawals that will happen because we're all human. We will all lose our cool. So making deposits, I'm the kind of person who intentionally makes deposits in my emotional bank accounts, in the relationships that I'm in. I'm the kind of person who values being real, not just my online representative. I'm the kind of person who knows when my body needs to move, who values being creative, who wants to be in control of myself. In other words, I don't want the technology to control me. I'm the kind of person who desires to build trust with my parents or to build trust with my child. And I'm the kind of person who values time in my inner world. So these are some things that have come out of that activity. And I think this is a really powerful activity to do in your family. And you can do it with younger children too. Little gingerbread men cutouts work really great for littler kids. And of course, just their words will be simpler. I'm the kind of person who values being kind or sharing. And if you can create a visual representation of this, when things come up around screens or many, many other things, you can just also simply say, are you being the person you mean to be right now? So it's a great tool to refer back and also just to get kids and ourselves really thinking about what is essential, what is important. And what we focus on grows. I believe this so deeply. Let's focus on what we want more of, which is the connection and not just less screen time. Okay, so let's look at the next concept of who is in control. And I think this is a way to really get buy-in with our kids. So I have a quote in the next screen, and I said at the top of it, how do you feel about brain hacking? And this quote comes from, I think, one of the early investors in Facebook and the Neptune founder, I don't know. He founded some big technology, I don't know. He said it's a social validation feedback loop, exactly the kind of thing that a hacker like myself would come up with because you're exploiting a vulnerability in human psychology. And what he's referring to in this is that these apps are designed to create compulsion looping. And that compulsion looping is created by activating a reward center in your brain. Every like that you get on a post on social media causes a little hit of dopamine. Getting to the next level in a game causes a hit of dopamine. So I think when kids, especially teenagers, understand how developers and marketers aim to psychologically manipulate them, they might want to take greater care because I don't know any teen that wants anyone telling them really what to do. So I think talking about this concept of brain hacking and getting them to really think about, once again, are you controlling the technology or is the technology controlling you? This goes for adults too. So I like to look at this as tool versus tether. So being really aware of when you're using technology as a tool and when it's a tether. Not all screen time is created equal. So I think one way to cultivate awareness as to when you're using it as a tool or when it's just kind of got its claws in you is to narrate what you're using the technology for. So as adults, let's say you're using your phone in the kitchen to look up a recipe for dinner and your kids are around, tell them, hey, I'm just going to pick this up and glance at this recipe. So they're not making assumptions that you're on Facebook. So they understand that you are using it in that moment as a tool and you're not disconnecting from them or placing more importance on it. You're trying to make them a yummy meal. And I think if we can train our kids to do the same sort of narration, that could keep us from making assumptions, and understanding really when they're using it for something that's truly important and healthy to them versus as a tether. And I think this concept of narrating keeps us honest, self-aware, reflective, and out of judgment. So creating awareness really, really is one of the most important steps in this, probably second to really building and deepening connection. So asking ourselves and asking our children, are you addicted? Does it own you or do you own it? So really, really looking at that. Asking, when do we use technology as a distraction from being with ourselves? And I think this concept of consciously developing our inner world, I think the phones have taken us all away from that. We don't get a lot of time to just kind of sit with our feelings. If we're at the DMV, waiting in a long line for a driver's license, we don't just sit there and think, we pick up the phone. A lot of times people at stoplights pick up a phone. It's like we have gotten so used to this constant engagement and constant input of information that we don't have a lot of just sort of percolating and reflecting time. So are you consciously developing your inner world, or are you escaping at the first sign of discomfort or anxiety or boredom? So I think we need to create some practices where we get to sit and map our inner landscape. This is how we develop emotional tools. We learn to sit in discomfort, that rather than distract ourselves from it, or sit in boredom. So my next slide is technology as a go-to to combat boredom. I like to talk about this idea of balancing creativity with consumption. We can be consumers on our phone, or we can be creators on our computers, any screen, because there's a lot of really amazing tools that we can use to create. And I like to ask my kids the question, what if? What if boredom is the universe's way of saying, hey, let's create something together? And let's reframe boredom as like a little nudge to say, let's get creative and let's create something. Let's add a contribution to the world. Humans are meant to create, to become fully actualized versions of ourselves and contributors to our world. And that goes back to that connection piece, that connection to a sense of purpose, like creating to feel purposeful. The other thing I say to my kids a lot is someone has to create every game, every app, every song, every screenplay that you're using your device to access. Why not you? Why not you? You can create that app, that song, that screenplay. Don't just consume them. So balance being a creator with being a consumer. So that's where I get into the concept of it's not all about quantity. Quality of use counts. So not all screen time is created equal, and time limits should really depend on what you're doing. And this goes back to narration and reflection, right? This is how we know. But if you're using your phone to escape because you're bored or because you're feeling uncomfortable or sad, that's a lot different than using your phone to use, or your computer to maybe use animation software and create something, or do some writing. There's just so many positive uses too, and we don't want to throw all those out because technology is not going away. So the goal here is to learn to live with it and take the positive things, but be in control of some of the negative side effects. So let's look just a little bit at the physical effects, and these are kind of some big words, and I'm not a scientist, so I'm going to just kind of briefly go over my understanding of these, and you can look especially in the Victoria Dunkley book, Reset Your Child's Brain, to get some more in-depth information about this. So neurotransmitter dysregulation, that's such a big word. So we've probably heard of dopamine. So dopamine is the feel-good neurotransmitter. Like we can get a dopamine sort of hit from going on a run, getting some good exercise. I think what's happening from the research that I've read, when we are using apps that are designed to create compulsion looping or these games, we get kind of a rapid rise and fall in dopamine, and maybe not the natural rise and fall that occur in things such as exercise or playing a competitive sport. So I think that this rise and fall that might be happening from compulsively using screens can short circuit our brain and cause the littlest things to become stressful. So I think we've probably all had an experience when we told our kids that's enough screen time, take the screen away, and they have a meltdown. And I really believe that that is the kind of crash of this dopamine. So just a good thing to research and look at. The next thing is serotonin, and that's important for socialization, stable mood, sense of well-being, coping with stress, staving off depression and anxiety. And our serotonin is levels are highest in the morning, and production is thought to be boosted by bright morning sunlight and physical activity. And if we're on our screens too late at night and not getting good sleep, we're probably not getting that boost of movement and sunlight in the mornings. And school schedules don't exactly help with that because school starts pretty early. Maybe everybody should have first period PE, and that would help. So the next one is melatonin, which it's kind of the opposite of serotonin, and melatonin is needed for sleep. And light at night suppresses melatonin. So phones, looking at those screens late at night, I think we've probably all heard something in the news about that disrupting sleep cycle. So dysregulated neurotransmitters, kind of a sedentary lifestyle, I think, that a lot of our kids have because they're on the screen so much, and then disrupted sleep, those are all really major contributors to depression and anxiety. When I go and tour programs where kids are placed in residential treatment, I'll go visit a lot of wilderness therapy programs. And it's pretty amazing how much healing happens just from kids being out in nature in wilderness therapy. But their sleep's regulated. They're getting the early morning sunlight. They're eating clean. They're hydrated. They're moving their bodies a lot more, and their screen is taken away for a period of time. And so many of their behavioral and mental health, negative mental health things disappear just in this environment. So I think that speaks to this idea of, when the phones start to disrupt some of the really natural processes of our body, this is when we see some problems. So let's look a little bit at the psychological and social effects. And I'll just really kind of gloss over this one a little bit because I think we all know quite a bit of this stuff. So we do know there is a correlation between screen-related depression and suicidality. Jean Twenge, the author of iGen, that's another great book to read. She also has an article in the Atlantic Monthly. You could Google Jean Twenge Atlantic Monthly, and it's a little condensed version of her book, iGen. She says that the correlation between smartphone usage and depression is strong. Teens who spend 3 hours a day or more on electronic devices are 35% more likely to have a risk factor for suicide. Teens who spend 5 or more hours are 71% more likely to have a risk factor. She found that half an hour to 1 hour per day seemed to be the sweet spot for teen mental health in terms of device use. And at 2 hours, she saw just a slightly elevated risk. So let's look at 1 hour a day as kind of that sweet spot. Now, I don't know if the research has really broken out what you're doing on the screen, because sometimes I wonder if they're using it to create something, if that's different than just escaping in Snapchat. And I think the research is still in its infancy and we don't know, but there is a correlation between length of time and some of these risk factors. So some of the other sort of psychological and social effects, feeling less than. We are in a constant state of comparison to every aspect of our lives, to everyone else that we see, because people are posting the best of on social media, right? So I think our kids, they're just comparing where everybody vacations, what everybody wears, who's at what party, just themselves physically. I think that's one of the really negative side effects of social media. Fear of missing out, FOMO. Kids will talk about that, and I think that is real. Bullying, I do think there is online bullying that does happen. And I think our kids are pretty savvy to that. I don't think I ever experienced that personally with my kids, but in some ways, I think posting the best of our lives, adults and kids alike, is kind of a form of bullying because we're not being authentic. We're sort of trying to, I think, feel better than people. And I do think it's as a culture, if we could take a stand and be a little more authentic with what we post, that could really help with this. That idea of sending our representatives online, not being our authentic self. There's a blogger, Glennon Doyle Mellon. She says this: we send our representatives online. So this kind of goes back to the person I mean to be. Do I mean to be an authentic person? are mistakes okay? And do I learn from my mistakes? And am I okay being vulnerable about making mistakes and not just posting the best of everything and not being my most authentic self in my online presence? Some other side effects is we're substituting human interaction with digital interaction, much less face-to-face time. And that goes back to the hand analogy and the connection. We're seeking a lot of external validation, those likes, pegging our self-worth to likes on Instagram or Snapchat or Facebook or any of these things. We're consuming things we can't unsee. Kids have access to so much at just the touch of a finger. And, one of the big issues, and I'm by no means an expert on this, but there's a lot of repercussion from kids having access to pornography. It's all over. They can get it really, really, really quickly. So I like to talk to kids about your mental real estate and your media diet. You get to choose what you consume. What do you want to consume? And that goes for adults too. So I like this concept of mental real estate and what gets to take up space in your mind. And then the next slide is just kind of a little humorous one. May your life be as perfect as you pretend it is on Instagram. I think we can all kind of relate to that. She does look like she has kind of a perfect everything there, but I'm going to guess she doesn't. So the next one is kind of obvious, and I think in digital citizenship classes at school and things, this is talked about, but I do think it needs to be reiterated. Your digital footprint, it follows you for life. The stuff doesn't disappear. So, the dumb stuff you're doing as a teenager and posting online stays there. There is a trail. So that's another awareness thing, and finding times to naturally talk to your kids about this when everybody's in their upstairs brain. We're not in a space of judgment, but just, I really care about you, and I really want you to know that this could impact you for your life, and maybe humanizing yourself again and saying, wow, I'm glad that phones and photos, cameras weren't everywhere when I was growing up, and every dumb thing I was doing wasn't posted, for all of time. So that was the last one there. I think the next one, we're going to move into creating that safe space for an honest conversation. And part of that honest conversation is allowing our kids to tell us what they see in our modeling. And sometimes it's painful because it's hard to look in the mirror. And I am the first to admit that my screen habits can be as bad as my kids. And I can use it in really, really unhealthy ways. And being okay and not being defensive when our kids call us out on that. Because the goal here is collaboration and creating a home where we are all concerned for an environment that is best for our brains and our bodies and our mental wellness. So just allowing our kids to call us out on our own stuff, modeling disconnection from our phones and connection to them, being purely present. This is a really hard experiment to do, but I try a little bit of it every day, being really in the moment when you're having a conversation with your kid, not thinking about something in the past, something you need to teach them, or something that you need to get to. But just this pure presence and listening, and a little of that is really potent. It goes a long way. You can sort of say, okay, I'm going to, especially when you're regrouping after being apart from a sleepover or a day at school, how can I sit and just be purely present for 5 minutes? I think you'll see a big decrease in behavioral issues just from being able to do that practice. And it's harder than you think because our brains are like Google, and we're constantly thinking about the next thing or the last thing that happened. So we're going to model disconnection from technology and connection and pure presence with our kid. We're going to also model working with technology. That goes back to that narration. We're going to model that we are in control of this. It's not the other way around. And having kids see us model and shape our own behavior is so much more powerful than our words. So we have to show our kids that we've been able to lay our own boundaries around our devices, okay? So let's go to the next slide. So we need an attitude of really trying to understand their world and their connection to their devices and where they're coming from. So curiosity versus judgment. And curiosity is one of my most favorite things when I do workshops that talk about a lot of behavioral issues with kids. I say the behavior is just what you see. That's just the tip of the iceberg. We have to get curious and look beneath that iceberg and say, what is the message beneath this behavior? So we're going to get really curious about their screen use and really ask questions about what's important to them. We're going to join them in their world. And sometimes that will be in their connected world because we want to understand what they're doing and what's important to them. I'm going to come back to that in just a minute. But I think another great activity with your kids is to brainstorm favorite non-tech ways to connect. What are their favorite non-technical ways to connect with their peers and with their family? So that's on the next slide, I think. There you go. Yeah. So just another little activity that you could do with your family at some point, just taking some time to brainstorm what ways do you like to be with your friends that screens are put to the side, and what ways do you like to be with your family. So the next slide is using technology to connect. And I heard this concept, I can't remember where, bottom-up technology. So it's our children teaching us. They are digital natives. These kids have knowledge of, I mean, if I have a technical issue with my phone or computer, I ask a 13-year-old and they can take care of it. So I think valuing that knowledge that they have and teaching them that we do value it, and giving them a role in the family, maybe as the tech support person, it improves their sense of self-worth, which is also going to improve the connection in the relationship and, start to instill intrinsic motivation with them. So we do have a tremendous opportunity to bond with our children through technology. So, for example, instead of struggling with our kids when they ask for 15 more minutes to finish a video game, what if we gave them 20 more minutes and we asked them to show us how to play the game? There's a really beautiful opportunity there to use the power of technology to deepen the relationship and to learn something about their world rather than tearing them down and getting caught in a power struggle. So in this moment, we're making the screen a relational experience. We're joining them and getting to that sixth level in their game. We're understanding maybe some of the online relationships that they have through gaming. I don't have boys, so gaming wasn't an issue in my house, but I have good friends with boys, and they've created incredibly complex social networks through games, and they're not all bad. There's a lot of skill building that happens. And when we can just sit with our kids and they're teaching us stuff, we're all in a yes brain now. And I also think when we understand what it takes for them to get to the sixth level, when it's time for dinner, we might be able to change our language. Instead of get down here right now because I said so, we can say, hey, once you hit the sixth level, because now we understand what this is like, then come for dinner. And then we're staying in that receptive space. So we're going to let screens, we're going to experiment with screens for stimulating conversation. When you're watching a movie, you can take time to pause it and explore the mind of different characters, their hopes, dreams, feelings, intentions. Why did that character behave that way? This is engagement through screens. And this is another way of going back to exploring the person that I mean to be. So the next thing is the healthy mind platter. And this is, Dr. Dan Siegel invented this little visual with a colleague of his, and it's a great refrigerator visual to print out. You can just Google this and find it. It's kind of modeled after the healthy plate that is, I think, replaced the food pyramid. So it's looking at the healthy mind platter and saying, for optimal brain health, we need a little bit in each of these areas every day, adults and kids alike. So printing this out, putting it on your fridge, maybe taking a little bit of time now and again to talk about different concepts on here. So getting good sleep, time in your inner world. Do you have a journaling practice or a meditation practice or something that really helps you map your inner world, practice sitting in discomfort or boredom or those things we touched on earlier. Downtime, just time when your own mind becomes a source of creativity, allowing boredom to stimulate creative thinking, unstructured time. Playtime, time to be spontaneous and creative with yourself and with others. And I guess sometimes this could involve screens. Focus time, So where we are not multitasking, and multitasking is misleading. Research says it's just variable, intermittent focus of attention, and it really kind of deteriorates our efficiency. So we don't really multitask. We just kind of jump second by second back and forth between things. So focus time where they're practicing, or we are practicing being really focused on a task at hand without distraction from screens. And then time to move our bodies back to that person I need to be. I'm a person who values knowing when my body needs to move. And then connecting time with people and with nature. So this is a really helpful visual that I would encourage you to Google, find it online, print it out, and put it on your fridge. So educating our children to understand all of this will hopefully instill a desire for them to take the lead in growing their best brain and body, right? So we're educating, we're cultivating awareness, we are modeling, and we're connecting. We're constantly working on that connection piece. So I start with that instead of just diving into how to create rules, because I think those are foundational. And the rules are that top part of that pyramid. That's the correcting, right? So we're going to help things go right before we deal with things that go wrong. So I am going to end with just a couple things here. My main house rules that I keep really short and simple. And my tip here is that adults have to follow these as well. So the first rule is people before screens. So be with the person you're with. That would mean no phones at the dinner table. You're with the people that you're with. Who gets the gift of your presence? That I think goes for car rides too. Car rides are an excellent time for kids to open up and talk to us. And I think part of that is because they don't have to make eye contact with us. So they'll open up. So people before screens, be with the people that you're with. Second rule is no double dipping. So you're not going to be watching a movie and have your iPad with a game going and have your phone where you're checking Facebook or Snapchat or something. We're not double dipping. It's one screen at a time, because I think too much stimulation is really, contributing to more and more dysregulation, which does lead to parent-child power struggles. So the next rule, the third rule, is give your nervous system and brain a chance to rest. And that means we're going to charge our phones on the counter as a family. We're not going to sleep with them in our bedrooms, because we need time to, let that melatonin kick in and just kind of calm everything down so that we can get good sleep. This is a hard one. Kids are going to say, but I use it for my alarm or for my music. And not one size fits all for every family. Maybe there's some kind of device that you can use to shut off certain apps, and they can have their phone for just music or an alarm, but you can also just get an old school alarm clock. But this is definitely a battle, even in my house. So we do have a little different rules in the summer than we do in the school year. But once again, my kids are older teenagers, and I know I won't be with them every second. One's, just finished her freshman year at college, and one's in high school and is at sleepovers all the time. So I can't enforce that rule everywhere. So the goal is to have created enough awareness and education, and to have modeled stuff in a way that they will self-regulate. So those are the three really main, easy, simple house rules to just give you a starting point for maybe creating some in your house. But once again, they're for the entire family. We're not talking reward and punishment. The adults have to follow these too, and our kids get to call us out on them when we don't follow them. So the next, I'm just going to read this little bit of this letter called Tether Yourself, an Awareness Strategy to Keep You from Drifting from Your Best Life. And it's by a blogger. She has a blog called Hands Free Mama, and her name is Rachel Macy Stafford. And I would encourage you to look up this letter and maybe even read it to your kids if they're age appropriate. So once again, I think if you just Google Tether Yourself, Hands Free Mama, or type in Rachel Macy Stafford, it will come up. So here's a little bit of my favorite part. Awareness, you see, awareness changes everything. Awareness is your weapon against the hidden influences and damaging behaviors. While you are online, your mind, your thoughts, your core values are drifting to wherever tech companies want you to go. The remedy is to limit the time you spend drifting in the online world and tether yourself to real life. Tether yourself to real people, to real conversations, and to real scenery. Tether yourself to furry animals, to interesting books, good music, and the great outdoors. Tether yourself to spatulas, hammers, cameras, paintbrushes, and yoga mats. When your worth is in question, when you feel lost and alone, when you feel sad and can't explain why, tether yourself to real life. Tether yourself to real people, tether yourself to real love. And I will help you set limits because I know teens feel pressure to be available 24/7. But you need and deserve time to be alone with your thoughts, doing things you enjoy without constant pressure and interruption from the outside world. Beautiful letter. I hope that you will look that up and consider reading it to your kids. So I hope that maybe your biggest takeaway from this is that it goes back to connection, and that in order to keep the lines of communication open around screens, we have to keep the lines of communication open around all topics and place greater focus on connection over control and correction, and just building that relationship. So build the connection, not the battle. That's probably one of my favorite little things. If you want more information on some of these topics that I touched on today, I have a podcast that you can subscribe to on iTunes or access through my website, which is www.bsparentcoach.com/podcast. And I interview lots of teens and teachers and therapists and all kinds of really interesting people and talk about lots of really applicable topics. So that comes out once a week on Thursdays. And if you need services in parent coaching or therapeutic placements or want to bring workshops to your area, my contact information is on this slide. And I think we're going to move into the polling and then some question and answer. Yes?
No.
No? No?
No, we get to skip polls this time. Well, actually, so what we'll probably end up doing is just sending them an email.
Okay.
Because we did not just get them integrated into the Zoom.
Okay,
so
no
they're
polls.
Still coming. You still have the opportunity to
Okay.
participate. Polls is my guess.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me. And thanks to everyone for coming
Yeah.
back and trying round two of this.
No, I love the one of those last slides you did, the build a connection and not
the battle.
I mean,
Yeah.
that to me, that's like one of those refrigerator things as a
It is.
reminder to parents, because so often so much of it is about the relationship.
Mhm.
We get so much farther with our kids when we're connected and having those
Absolutely.
conversations as opposed to trying to control them. But
Yeah.
at the same time, I understand that sense of just like,
Yeah. Oh, it's
We've been on it
frustrating.
so
There's
long.
nothing easy about this. And I don't think I gave anyone a magic formula that fixes everything today, but hopefully some new perspectives and some
Mhm.
new ways of looking at things. And
Mhm.
if we go back to that pyramid, just helping things go right so
Yeah.
that we don't get stuck
Mhm.
up there and staying in that upstairs brain.
Yeah,
Yeah.
more kids understand,
Yeah.
the ramifications of their decisions. So yeah, great topics. I have watched some on Vashti's podcast. They're really good. I love the guests that she has had. The conversations are bright and stimulating and really interesting.
Thank
So
you.
I would say when you have time, jump onto them. You'll find
Thank you.
just a multitude of different topics. So I hope you'll come back and visit us on another topic of conversation.
Yeah, that would
down
be
in the
really
future. I know
fun.
you're really busy and you've got a lot going on, so appreciate all your work. Also, definitely contact Vashti's a great resource. And you're working beyond just like Boise. I mean, you will consult
Yes.
with parents across the state.
Yeah,
so
or
you're-
across the country. And I
Okay.
visit programs, treatment programs all over.
Okay.
So I'm trying to just build a body of information and resources. I think that was one of the most difficult things for our family when we needed resources. Finding resources is
Mhm.
really,
Mhm.
really tricky. I hope to do enough of this upstream preventative stuff that the need for that is lessened, but it is there. And so I kind of consider myself a connector for that. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks for all the work you're doing.
Yeah.
Yeah. So join us next month. We have, I don't know the date right now, but Kim Kane is joining us, and she really specializes in the topic of suicidality, and she wants to talk with parents about, what are the things that you should be concerned about? Because I think today often we get super worried very quickly. So she will come, just give us kind of reality check on, what are some of the warning signs to be concerned about. And with that, I think they're telling us that we are done.
Are we done?
No.
Oh, no.
Question.
We have a question.
Oh, we have a
Okay.
question.
Who would like her contact information again?
Great. Okay. Thank you, everyone.
That's it. Great.
Yeah. Bye.
Yeah.